Picture this. You're driving strangers around your city every night, going through the motions, picking up passengers who barely look up from their phones. Most rides are forgettable. Airport runs, late-night pickups from bars, early morning coffee dashes. You've heard every conversation, witnessed every kind of human drama, and learned to keep your distance. But sometimes, just sometimes, a single question from a passenger can completely derail the track your life was on. Sometimes it's not about the destination. It's about discovering who you become during the journey. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Rodriguez was 32 and had been driving for rideshare companies in Denver for almost 3 years. She lived in a cramped studio apartment in the Highlands neighborhood, barely making ends meet between her driving shifts and weekend gigs bartending at a dive bar called Murphy's. Her life had settled into a predictable rhythm that felt both comfortable and suffocating. Wake up around noon, grab coffee from the gas station on the corner, check her phone for surge pricing, and hit the road by 2 in the afternoon. Most nights she'd drive until well past midnight, ferrying drunk college students back to their dorms, business people to hotels, and service industry workers like herself to late-night shifts across the city. Maya hadn't planned on this being her life. 3 years earlier, she'd been finishing up her master's degree in social work at the University of Colorado, full of idealistic dreams about helping families, working with at-risk youth, maybe eventually opening her own counseling practice. But when her father had his stroke during her final semester, everything changed. The medical bills piled up faster than snow in a February blizzard, and her part-time income wasn't enough to cover both her own expenses and help her parents keep their house in Aurora. So she put her dreams on hold, took out loans to finish school, and started driving to pay the bills. The work wasn't terrible, just mind-numbing in its sameness. She'd gotten good at reading people quickly, the ones who wanted to chat, the ones who preferred silence, the ones who might cause trouble. Her Toyota Camry had over 200,000 miles on it, but it was reliable, and she'd learned every shortcut and back road in the metro area. She kept mints in the cup holder, phone chargers for different devices, and always had a spare umbrella for passengers caught in sudden rainstorms. Most of her regular passengers barely registered her as a person, just a service provider getting them from point A to point B. Denver's downtown core was where she made most of her money, especially on Friday and Saturday nights when the bars emptied out and people needed rides home to the suburbs. She'd mastered the art of small talk without getting too personal, learned which areas to avoid during certain hours, and developed an internal clock that told her exactly when surge pricing would kick in. Her parents thought she was just taking a temporary break from her career plans. Her friends from graduate school had all moved on to internships and entry-level positions at nonprofits and therapy centers. Maya told herself this was just a phase, that she'd figure out her next move eventually. But 3 years had slipped by with startling speed. The September evening that changed everything started like any other. Maya had just dropped off a businessman at the Westin downtown when her phone buzzed with a new pickup request. The passenger was named Elena. Pickup location was Cherry Creek North, one of the more upscale shopping areas. It was a Thursday night. Not particularly busy, but the fare looked decent enough. Maya drove through the familiar streets, past the boutiques and restaurants that catered to people with more disposable income than she'd ever had. She found the pickup spot outside a small art gallery that she'd never noticed before, its windows glowing warm yellow against the darkening sky. A woman emerged from the gallery before Maya even had a chance to park properly. She was probably in her early 40s, dressed in a flowing burgundy coat that looked both elegant and artistic. Her dark hair was streaked with premature silver, pulled back in a loose bun that had pieces falling around her face. There was something about the way she moved, unhurried but purposeful, that made Maya take notice. Most passengers rushed to the car, already mentally checked out and focused on their phones. This woman paused at the curb, looked directly at Maya through the windshield, and smiled. Not the polite, distracted smile most people gave their drivers, but something genuine and warm. Elena opened the back door and slid in, bringing with her the faint scent of jasmine perfume and something that reminded Maya of art supplies, maybe paint or charcoal. Instead of immediately burying herself in her phone like 90% of Maya's passengers, Elena made eye contact in the rearview mirror and said hello like she actually meant it. Her voice had a slight accent that Maya couldn't immediately place, maybe Eastern European, soft around the edges but clear and confident. Maya confirmed the destination address, which was in Capitol Hill, about 15 minutes away depending on traffic. As she pulled away from the curb, Elena surprised her by asking if she'd ever been inside the gallery they'd just left. Maya admitted she hadn't, explaining that she usually only came to this area for passenger pickups. Elena's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm as she described the small show that had just opened. Paintings by a local artist who specialized in urban landscapes but painted them to look like they were underwater, everything distorted and dreamlike. The way she talked about art made Maya realize this wasn't just polite conversation. Elena clearly knew what she was talking about, spoke about color and composition and emotional impact with the fluency of someone who understood the language. Traffic was heavier than usual, giving them more time to talk. Elena asked Maya if she was from Denver originally, and Maya found herself sharing more than she typically did with passengers. She explained that she'd grown up in Pueblo, moved to Denver for college, and had been here ever since. When Elena asked what she'd studied, Maya hesitated for a moment before mentioning her master's degree in social work. She wasn't sure why she felt compelled to share that detail. Maybe because Elena seemed genuinely interested, or maybe because it felt good to remember that version of herself, the one with professional ambitions and a clear sense of purpose. Elena's response surprised her. Instead of the usual polite acknowledgement, she asked thoughtful questions about what had drawn Maya to social work, what population she'd hoped to work with, whether she'd completed any internships in the field. As Maya answered, she realized she hadn't talked about her abandoned career plans with anyone in months. Her parents worried enough about her financial situation without her adding career dissatisfaction to their concerns, and her old classmates were all busy establishing themselves in jobs Maya couldn't afford to take. They were about halfway to the destination when Elena asked a question that caught Maya completely off guard. She leaned forward slightly, her reflection visible in the rearview mirror, and said, "Maya, I know this might sound strange, but would you be willing to take me somewhere special instead? Somewhere I haven't been to in a very long time?" Maya felt her pulse quicken slightly. In 3 years of driving, she'd learned to be cautious about passengers who wanted to change destinations on the fly. Usually it meant they were intoxicated, lost, or trying to avoid paying the higher fare to their actual destination. But something about Elena's tone was different. Not demanding or manipulative, just vulnerable in a way that made Maya curious rather than defensive. Maya asked where she wanted to go, and Elena gave her an address in Golden, about 25. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Minutes west of downtown. She explained that there was an old art studio there, a place where she used to work years ago, and she hadn't been back since she'd left Colorado. She'd been in town for just a few days, wrapping up some business, and realized this might be her last chance to visit before flying back home. Elena offered to pay whatever the fare ended up being, plus a generous tip for the inconvenience. But Maya found herself agreeing before the financial details were even settled. There was something in Elena's voice when she mentioned the studio, a mixture of nostalgia and nervousness that reminded Maya of how she felt when she drove past the university campus where she'd spent 6 years dreaming about her future. She updated the destination in her app and headed west toward the mountains, watching the city lights gradually give way to darker, more residential neighborhoods. As they drove, Elena began to open up about why this particular destination mattered so much to her. The studio belonged to a woman named Iris Hoffman, a sculptor who had been Elena's mentor when she first moved to Colorado in her late 20s. Elena had come to Denver from Romania, newly divorced, speaking decent English but carrying very little besides her talent for painting, and a fierce determination to start over completely. Iris had given her space to work, taught her about the American art scene, and most importantly, believed in her work when Elena barely believed in herself. Elena described those years as some of the most creatively productive of her life. She'd worked part-time jobs during the day, cleaning offices, waiting tables, whatever paid the bills, and spent her evenings and weekends at Iris's studio, painting with an intensity she'd never experienced before. The work she created during that period eventually earned her acceptance into a prestigious MFA program in California, which led to gallery representation, art sales, and eventually a teaching position at a respected art school on the West Coast. But Elena admitted that success had come with its own complications. The teaching job was secure and well-paying, her work sold consistently, and she'd built a comfortable life in Northern California. Yet somewhere along the way, she'd lost touch with the raw creative hunger that had driven her during those early years in Denver. Her recent paintings felt technically proficient but emotionally hollow, and she'd been struggling with a creative block that had lasted almost 2 years. She'd come back to Colorado to settle some legal matters related to a family estate, but really, she suspected she'd been looking for an excuse to revisit the places and people who had shaped her during that transformative period. Maya found herself genuinely invested in Elena's story. There was something about the way Elena talked about her artistic struggles that resonated deeply. Even though Maya's own abandoned dreams were in a completely different field, the feeling of losing touch with the person you used to be, of wondering whether you'd made the right choices along the way, those were emotions Maya recognized intimately. They reached golden just as the last light was fading from the sky behind the foothills. Elena directed Maya through a series of increasingly narrow streets until they reached a small industrial area that looked like it had been converted into artist studios and creative spaces. Most of the buildings were dark, but one structure at the end of the street had warm light spilling from its windows. Elena stared at the building for a long moment, then asked if Maya would mind waiting while she went inside. She wasn't sure how long the visit would take, but she promised it wouldn't be more than an hour. Maya agreed, curious despite herself about what would happen when Elena knocked on the door. She watched Elena walk up to the entrance, hesitate for just a moment, then ring the bell. After what felt like several minutes, the door opened, and Maya could see the silhouette of an older woman backlit by the studio's interior lights. Even from a distance, Maya could see the moment of recognition, followed by what looked like a very emotional reunion. Maya turned off the engine and settled in to wait. She pulled out her phone to scroll through social media, but found herself distracted by the warm glow of the studio windows and the glimpses she could catch of Elena and her former mentor deep in conversation. Maya realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd had a conversation with anyone about the things that truly mattered to her. Not logistics or bills or day-to-day survival, but dreams and fears, and the gap between who she was and who she'd hoped to become. About 45 minutes later, Elena emerged from the studio, but instead of walking directly back to the car, she gestured for Maya to join her. Maya hesitated. She generally tried to maintain professional boundaries with passengers, but something about the way Elena was waving her over suggested this wasn't a casual invitation. Maya locked the car and walked toward the studio, curious and slightly nervous about what she'd find inside. Iris Hoffman was exactly what Maya had imagined from Elena's description, a woman in her 70s with paint-stained fingers, silver hair in a wild braid, and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she was accustomed to seeing through people's pretenses. The studio space was extraordinary, filled with sculptures in various stages of completion, canvases stretched and ready for paint, and works that looked like they'd been in progress for months or even years. The smell of clay and turpentine and coffee created an atmosphere that felt both creative and lived in. Elena introduced Maya to Iris, explaining how their conversation during the drive had touched on Maya's background in social work. Iris immediately became interested, asking Maya questions about her education and what had drawn her to the field originally. When Maya mentioned that she'd specialized in art therapy techniques during her graduate work, Iris's eyes lit up with recognition and enthusiasm. It turned out that Iris had been looking for someone to help her develop a community program that would bring art-making opportunities to underserved populations in the area: homeless individuals, at-risk youth, people struggling with addiction or mental health challenges. She had the space, the materials, and the artistic expertise, but she needed someone with training in social work and counseling to help design the program and facilitate groups. She'd been trying to find the right person for months, placing ads and reaching out to local universities, but hadn't found anyone who understood both the therapeutic potential of creative work and the practical challenges of serving vulnerable populations. Maya felt her heart rate increase as Iris described the program she envisioned. It sounded exactly like the kind of work Maya had dreamed about during graduate school, the perfect combination of her clinical training and her intuitive understanding of how creative expression could be healing. But it also sounded too good to be true, the kind of opportunity that happened to other people, not to someone who'd been driving for Uber for 3 years and had almost given up on her professional aspirations. Elena watched this conversation unfold with growing excitement. clearly thrilled that her impulsive decision to revisit her old mentor had created this unexpected connection. She urged Maya to take Iris's offer seriously, sharing that some of the most important opportunities in her own life had come from similar moments of synchronicity and openness to the unexpected. Iris invited Maya to come back the following week to see the space in more detail and discuss the program more thoroughly. She offered a salary that wasn't huge but was enough to cover Maya's basic expenses, plus the opportunity to build something meaningful from the ground up. Maya found herself saying yes before she'd fully processed what she was agreeing to, carried along by the enthusiasm of both women and the sudden sense that the universe was offering her a chance to step back onto the path she'd abandoned. The drive back to Elena's hotel passed in a blur of excited conversation. Elena shared stories about her own career pivots and the importance of taking risks when opportunities aligned with your deepest values. Maya found herself talking about her father's recovery, her family's financial situation, and her fear that she'd waited too long to pursue her original dreams. Elena listened with the same focused attention she'd brought to their entire interaction, offering insights and encouragement without minimizing Maya's legitimate concerns about making such a significant life change. When they reached Elena's hotel, she insisted on paying Maya far more than the fare warranted, calling it an investment in Maya's future. But more than the generous tip, Elena gave Maya her contact information and made her promise to stay in touch as she navigated this new opportunity. She mentioned that she'd be returning to California in a few days, but would love to hear how things developed with Iris and the community art program. Maya drove home that night with her mind racing, barely able to concentrate on the familiar streets. For the first time in years, she felt like she could see a version of her future that didn't involve just surviving paycheck to paycheck, but actually building something that mattered. The encounter felt almost surreal in retrospect. What were the odds that a random passenger would turn out to be someone whose story intersected so perfectly with her own abandoned dreams? Over the next several days, Maya found it difficult to focus on her usual driving routine. She kept thinking about her conversation with Iris, imagining what it would be like to facilitate art therapy groups, to help people discover their own creative voices as a pathway to healing. She researched community art programs in other cities, refreshed her knowledge of group counseling techniques, and even started sketching out ideas for how different populations might respond to various artistic mediums. The following Thursday, Maya drove back out to Golden for her meeting with Iris. This time, she came as a potential colleague rather than just someone's Uber driver, and the shift in perspective felt both thrilling and terrifying. Iris showed her around the entire facility, explained her vision for the program in more detail, and introduced Maya to two other artists who worked in the building and were excited about the community outreach initiative. The program would start small, maybe one group per week, focusing on individuals transitioning out of homelessness. But Iris hoped to expand quickly if the pilot was successful. Maya would be responsible for screening participants, facilitating the groups with Iris's artistic guidance, and helping to document the program's impact for potential grant funding. It was exactly the kind of work Maya had imagined doing when she first decided to pursue social work, the perfect blend of clinical skills and creative collaboration. Maya officially gave her 2 weeks' notice to the rideshare company and took her last shift on a rainy Friday night in October. She'd expected to feel nostalgic about closing this chapter of her life, but instead she felt relief and anticipation. As she drove her final passengers, a group of friends celebrating a birthday, a couple heading home from dinner, a college student returning to campus after visiting family, Maya realized how much she'd learned during her 3 years on the road. She'd become an expert at reading people quickly, navigating difficult conversations, and staying calm under pressure. Those skills would serve her well in her new role. The community art program launched in November with Maya facilitating her first group of 8 participants. The session was both chaotic and magical. Some people dove into the materials immediately, others needed significant encouragement just to pick up a paintbrush, and everyone had their own complex reasons for being there. But by the end of the 2-hour session, Maya could see the beginnings of something powerful happening. People who had barely made eye contact at the start were showing each other their work, sharing stories, laughing at the mess they'd made with clay and paint. Elena kept her promise to stay in touch, calling every few weeks to hear updates about the program and Maya's adjustment to her new career. Their conversations evolved into a genuine friendship, with Elena sharing her own struggles to reconnect with her creative inspiration and Maya offering insights about the therapeutic power of artistic expression that she was witnessing firsthand in her groups. By the spring, Maya's program had expanded to include 3 different groups serving different populations, and she'd been asked to present their model at a regional conference on community mental health initiatives. Iris had become not just a supervisor but a mentor, teaching Maya about the business side of running arts organizations and encouraging her to think about long-term sustainability and growth. The work wasn't always easy. Maya struggled with the emotional weight of some participants' stories, the frustration of limited resources, and the challenge of measuring success in work that was often more about small internal shifts than dramatic external changes. But every week brought moments that reminded her why she'd been drawn to this field originally. A participant discovering they could create something beautiful, despite never having thought of themselves as artistic. Someone finding the courage to share a difficult experience through their artwork. The gradual building of trust and community within the groups. Maya's life outside of work began to shift as well. She moved to a larger apartment, in a neighborhood she actually liked, started dating again after years of being too exhausted from driving to invest in relationships, and rekindled friendships with some of her former classmates who were working in related fields. She felt like herself again for the first time since her father's stroke had derailed her original career plans. Elena visited Denver again the following fall, partly to see Maya's program in action, and partly to spend more time with Iris, whose friendship had become important to her again. Maya watched Elena observe one of the groups, saw how moved she was by the participants' work and the atmosphere of acceptance and creativity that had developed over the months. Elena later confided that witnessing Maya's program had helped her understand what had been missing from her own recent artwork, that sense of purpose and connection to something larger than individual expression. During that visit, Elena made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She requested a leave of absence from her teaching position and decided to spend several months in Denver, working on a new series of paintings inspired by the community art program and collaborating with Iris on a project that would document the therapeutic power of creative expression. Maya offered Elena the spare bedroom in her new apartment, and for several months they lived like artistic roommates, sharing meals and long conversations about their work, their dreams, and the unexpected ways life could change direction. Elena's paintings from that period were some of the strongest work she'd created in years, filled with the emotional intensity and authentic connection that had been missing from her earlier pieces. She eventually returned to California, but with a renewed sense of purpose and a commitment to incorporating community engagement into her teaching and personal practice. Maya continued to build the community art program, eventually earning enough grant funding to hire additional staff and serve more populations throughout the Denver metro area. She never returned to driving for rideshare companies, though she sometimes thought about that Thursday evening when Elena had asked to go somewhere special, and how that single conversation had redirected the entire trajectory of her life. 5 years after that first meeting, Maya received an invitation to Elena's solo exhibition at a gallery in San Francisco. The show was called Somewhere Special, and it featured paintings inspired by Elena's time in Denver, including several pieces that depicted Maya's art therapy groups with luminous, dreamlike beauty. Maya flew to California for the opening, her first vacation in years, and was amazed to see how Elena had transformed their shared experience into something visually stunning and emotionally powerful. At the gallery opening, Elena introduced Maya to collectors, critics, and other artists as the person who had inspired the entire series. But Maya knew the truth was more complex than that. They had inspired each other, at exactly the moment when both of them were ready to take risks and embrace change. Elena had given Maya the courage to believe that her abandoned dreams were still worth pursuing, and Maya had reminded Elena that the most meaningful art comes from genuine connection to other people's experiences and struggles. Standing in that gallery in San Francisco, surrounded by paintings that captured the beauty and complexity of the work she'd built in Denver, Maya realized that her story had become something she never could have imagined during those long nights of driving strangers around the city. She'd learned that sometimes the most important destinations are the ones you discover along the way, and that the people who change your life often appear when you least expect them, asking simple questions that turn out to be invitations to transform everything. Maya still lived in Denver, still worked with Iris to run the community art program that had grown into one of the most respected initiatives of its kind in the region. She'd completed additional training in expressive arts therapy, started teaching workshops for other social workers interested in incorporating creative techniques into their practice, and had been recognized by several professional organizations for her innovative work. But she never forgot that all of it had started with a passenger who asked to go somewhere special, and Maya's willingness to say yes to an unexpected detour. Sometimes during her groups, when she watched participants discover their own creative voices or find new ways to express difficult emotions, Maya thought about Elena's question and realized it had been about more than just changing destinations. It had been about being open to possibility, about recognizing that the most important journeys are often the ones that take you further from where you thought you were headed and closer to who you were always meant to become. On quiet evenings, Maya would sit in her apartment and think about all the passengers she'd driven during those 3 years, wondering how many other conversations she might have missed by staying focused on the destination rather than the person sitting behind her. She'd learned that everyone has somewhere special they need to go, some place that represents their deepest hopes or most important relationships or forgotten dreams. The trick is learning to recognize those moments when someone trusts you enough to share that vulnerable information, and having the courage to say yes when they ask you to take them there. Maya's story had become proof that sometimes the most profound changes come not from dramatic life events, but from small acts of openness and human connection. A stranger's simple request, a willingness to listen, a decision to take an unexpected detour. These tiny moments of possibility could redirect everything if you were brave enough to follow where they led. Elena still sent Maya paintings occasionally, usually pieces inspired by their continuing friendship and the work Maya was doing in Denver. Each painting captured something different about their shared experience, the trust that had developed during that first car ride, the excitement of discovering unexpected connections, the satisfaction of work that aligned with deeply held values. Maya hung them in her office at the art studio, where participants often asked about the stories behind the beautiful images. Maya would smile and tell them about the night a passenger asked to go somewhere special, and how that single question had taught her that the most important destinations are often the ones you discover by being willing to change course. Years later, Maya would look back on her driving period not as lost time, but as essential preparation for the work she was meant to do. Those 3 years had taught her how to listen to people's stories, how to navigate difficult situations with grace, and how to recognize the humanity in everyone she encountered. Most importantly, they had taught her that you never know which conversation might change your life, which passenger might offer you the key to becoming who you were always meant to be. The art therapy program Maya built became a model for similar initiatives across the country, and she was frequently invited to speak at conferences about the importance of community-based creative interventions. But she always made sure to mention Elena in her presentations, explaining how their chance meeting had reminded her that the most meaningful work often comes from unexpected collaborations and the willingness to help others reach their own special places. Maya had learned that being an Uber driver wasn't just about transportation, it was about bearing witness to people's lives, their hopes and struggles and dreams during the brief moments they shared her car. And sometimes, if you listened carefully enough and stayed open to possibility, those moments could transform not just the passenger's journey, but your own as well. The question, "Can you take me somewhere special?" had turned out to be an invitation to discover that Maya's own special place was wherever she could use her skills and compassion to help others heal and grow through creative expression. In the end, Maya realized that Elena had given her more than just a career opportunity or a meaningful friendship. She had given her permission to believe that it was never too late to reclaim abandoned dreams, never too late to take risks in service of work that mattered, and never too late to discover that the person you were meant to become was still waiting patiently for you to have the courage to meet her. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.